was a wonder to behold in action, and she knew exactly how to support me in a number of my unraveling moments. And then was her love for our rascally midlife child, Jessie. She made her delight in him clear from the get-go, at a time when he was not, shall we say, unendingly delightful. And that too was a gift. Then was her encouragement again when my husband and I made our move to our present house, and the assignment she gave me, an exercise that I would have rejected from the outset had it been from anyone other than Colleen, to write on a 3x5 card all the things that I would want in a home, so that I could look back later and see how, as the old hymn said, how my desires had been granted in what he ordaineth, so that it would build my faith. And I did. And all the one of the items on that list was fulfilled. And then her housewarming gift the following year was stunning. Oak rug she designed and made with the autumn leaves and the words of one of my favorite verses, Exodus 34:6. The Lord, gracious, merciful, abounding in steadfast love. It hangs in our foyer, and it's an absolute treasure. I asked Colleen once if she could have had her pick of any child on earth, knowing what God knew about the length of that child's life. Would she be tempted to choose another, or would she still choose Heather? She didn't hesitate for a minute to say, I would choose Heather. I hope you can hear what I heard in that declaration, what it said about Colleen's understanding of what it means to live under the sovereign hand of God, and of being willing to love with all the risks of heartbreak that come with it. I want to say finally that Ellis and Colleen together have been for us the embodiment of the most poignant, plaintive expressions of hope and perplexity that Scripture has to offer. Lord, to whom else will we go? For with you are the words of life. Though he slay me, yet will I trust him. I am a man who has seen affliction, yet this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. Let the bones thou hast broken rejoice. He is torn, and he will heal us. I was reminded the other week of the scene in Pilgrim's Progress at the Hill of Difficulty. Timorous and mistrust give a bad report to Christian when they run away from the hill. But Christian says, you make me afraid, but whither shall I fly to be safe? If I go back to my own country, that is prepared for fire and brimstone, and I shall certainly perish there. If I can get to the celestial city, I am sure to be in safety there. I must venture. To go back is nothing but death. To go forward is fear of death and life everlasting beyond it. I will yet go forward. Ellis and Colleen have been a lifelong witness to us all that beyond this veil of tears and loss, we have a sure and steadfast anchor for the soul, a hope that enters the inner shrine behind the curtain, where Jesus is gone as a forerunner on our behalf, having become a high priest forever after the work of Melchizedek.
All you can say after that is amen. Which I could easily say if it's not long for 2 weeks. What I do want to say is, I think what you sense and what hopefully everybody else senses here this morning is shalom. There's peace, but it's more than that. There's wholeness and completeness, because we know where she is, and we know what we're going. I think it's phenomenal that God chose to take Colleen look, whether it's decorated inside or maybe not so much here, but every place else, that there is color and vibrancy and the reminder that life will continue even when it seems to fade. So I asked Ellis permission to write a little bit about his wife. So I'm going to read it because if I don't, I will ramble forever. So, squirrel, just saying. Grief is neither a respecter of people, time, or expectations. Its rudeness takes us by surprise. Its perseverance feels overwhelming. My dear friend Ellis lost his beloved wife Colleen on October 4th. She lost her battle with ALS in the early morning hours, with Ellis sleeping beside her hospice bed. She went quietly, much the way she lived her life, but with a determination not to be defined by disease, but by where she was going. Home, to heaven, to be with Jesus and her sweet daughter Heather, who arrived at heaven's gates before almost 25 years ago. I can't imagine the depth of loss Ellis is experiencing, his only child and his wife, grief multiplied and ongoing, pain that deserves time and attention. We were friends with Ellis and Colleen when we lost their daughter so many years ago. Devastating to them and those around them, they grieved together, yet very different. There's no formula or right way to grieve. It's how God leads our hearts so we may deal with loss in a way that suits our souls. There is no end point. A possible softening of the hard edges of pain. A tenderness derived from beautiful memories, but uninvited, it never truly leaves. It ages with us and reminds us that death is as much a part of life as birth. Loss is as powerful as gain. Within less than a year after their daughter's death, Colleen and I were part of a moms group headed overseas to minister to moms on the mission field. I think you remember this. Colleen's wounds were raw, and as she shared her loss, how it colored the rest of her life, she ministered to women who lost loved ones without recognition, who grieved without anyone's understanding. Colleen loved others deeply in her own grief. Ellis has done so as well, where his wife gently pulled back from the larger picture of our organization. He embraced the opportunity to be with those he worked with, and Colleen gave him permission. Spending time with Colleen in their shared pain, sharing life with others, and enjoying the children and grandchildren of others, a gift not given them, yet never has there been resentment, only rejoicing. Both have had an incredible impact on others with the journey. And a culture that doesn't easily deal with grief, there's been a reminder that each of us needs permission to deal with our pain as it comes. It can't be approached with a strategic mindset. It can only be embraced with a heart of remembered and ongoing love. Ellis is now living in that space where his life hasn't gone as planned. His loss appears greater than what he has left. This was nothing to be expected and nothing he asked for. And yet, he walks through this with a God who gave his only son for humanity, who didn't acknowledge the gift, people who couldn't see the greatness of what stood before them. The God who understands grief and loss because he experienced it, who loves without question those who seek him and lay their hurts and losses in his lap. People may see God as a crutch. Some believers lean on because they're weak and can't cope. Absolutely true. Life is heavy, hard, and messy. And apart from the promise of heaven, found only in a relationship with Jesus, I don't know how people deal with pain this way. Ellis has the assurance of one day being reunited with his wife and daughter and his Savior. The quiet joy amidst the turbulence of sadness. So the question we all need to ask is, what assurance do we have for what's next?
We'll go ahead and stand again. Thank you for being here. I cannot fully express how grateful I am to have you join me this morning. And I'm especially grateful for Adam, Jerry, Steve, Lee, Michael, and Marcy for you to be here. 24 days ago, Thursday at 3:22 a.m., Colleen's suffering ended. And like our daughter Heather, 25 years ago, who preceded her, was instantly in the presence of the Lord, rejoicing in his presence, and finally reunited with Heather. For me, I have a profound assurance of where they both are, and at the same time must live with the sting of overwhelming grief and unbearable loss. Colleen was only in hospice for 3.5 days, and I was with her the whole time. I was in a recliner, as Dale shared, sleeping next to her. I had hardly had any sleep that week and must have dozed off. And the nurse came in and woke me at about 3:30 in the morning to tell me that Heather was gone. As I sat next to her, it was a sense of understanding that her journey in this battle was over. It was a surreal experience. Wasn't quite sure what to do. And so I packed up her things and came over to her and kissed her one last time. And at 5 a.m. I walked out of the door to go home. Steve suggested that I get some sleep, but there's no way that I was able to sleep. I laid in bed for a short time and then got up. 10 days ago, a private service in Pittsburgh, I buried Colleen next to her grandparents. And then we had a small service for her 2 brothers and a small number of her family. You've probably heard this, it's not original, but grief is a price we pay for those you love. But we have the assurance, as Paul said in 1 Thessalonians, brothers and sisters, we do not want you to be uninformed about those who sleep in death, that you do not grieve like the rest of mankind who have no hope. For we believe that Jesus died and rose again, and so we believe that God will bring with Jesus those who have fallen asleep in him. And so when we talk about that Colleen is rejoicing in the Lord, it is not a fairy tale, it is not a story we made up, it is something that is sound truth. She is with him and rejoicing, experiencing no more pain. Since 1970, when I trusted Jesus as my Messiah, Crew has been a family to me. You came around Colleen and me when we lost Heather, and again, you've embraced me with Colleen's homecoming. I can't tell you the number of people who committed themselves to pray for me. It seems like almost every day somebody tells me that they're praying every day. People have said to me, one friend in particular said, just say the word. I'll be on a plane to be out there. I felt like I almost needed a travel agent to control the number of people who wanted to come and visit. If you're one of those people, the time will come. I'll let you know. We'll find some things to do around the house. Steve and Christy Shearer came to see Colleen about 8 days before she died. That was the first time they got to see Colleen since she was diagnosed with ALS. And I'm so glad that you two came. I just can't thank you enough for being there. As Chrissy described, Colleen was no longer able to talk, but she was able to engage in conversation. And I was so glad that she had that visit. It was the last visit that she would have before she passed away. Steve and John Rogers came the day after Colleen died. Another friend, Kelly, who was my assistant 27 years ago, called me and just about said to me she was coming. And I'm so glad she did. What she did for me, she knew that I couldn't do and shouldn't do. And that was to pack up Colleen's things and take care of them. And she did that. I walked into our closet, our walk-in closet that she was working on, and she basically threw me out and said, you don't need to be here. I'll take care of it. When Heather died, that was so hard, and that word doesn't even describe it. But at times, and I'm sure this was some of you, I didn't know if I would make it. During some of the very dark days, there were times it seemed like it would be easier to die rather than go on. I am grateful that I knew better. What I don't want you to dwell on is this, because I know that some people have thought about this. Some people have verbalized it, thinking they have suffered so much already. Why, God, have you done this to them and now others? And what comes to mind is that sage, Tevye from Fiddler on the Roof. If you haven't watched that recently, pull it up and watch it. And Tevye said something like this as he was thinking about the Jewish people, the God's chosen people, and this is during the time of the pogroms in Russia. And he said, God, can't you choose somebody else for a while? And I have felt that. Moish Rosen, who was the founder of Jews for Jesus, and I think that he said this during his final illness. Somebody asked him, well, why you? Why would God allow you to suffer like this? And his response was typical Moish. Why not me? That's actually extremely theological. It's accurate. In Matthew 5:35 it says this, he who causes the sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and unrighteousness. As those who have embraced Jesus as our Messiah, we don't get a special pass and get an exemption from illness and suffering. We don't get to do that. There's an interesting conversation that Job had with his wife. I'm not even sure I would call it a conversation. After he went through the horrendous suffering and loss that he experienced, which is just cataclysmic compared to what I've gone through. His wife said to him, are you still holding on to your integrity? Curse God and die. Job replied, you're talking like a foolish woman. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble? Sometimes in our arrogance we ask the question, why should some people suffer and others not? We don't get to choose, but God makes that choice. We don't get a pass on suffering. Some suffer more than others, and I don't always know the reason why. And I know it seems like we've got more than our fair share. The other week, as I was talking to the Lord, and I was thinking about the past 25 years of losing Heather and how difficult that's been, and I said to him, I can't do another 25 years like this. A friend of mine thought he was being helpful, and he shared the following. You won't be around in 25 years. True, but that was not helpful. Sometimes it's just better to say, I don't know what to say. I don't know how to do life without Colleen. I don't. We've been married for 44 years, 4 months, and a handful of days. You learn to become committed to each other. You're part of each other. It's not easy to all of a sudden be alone. What I do know is God's promise in Isaiah 41, where he said, so do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. This morning, before I left to come over here, I prayed that. Let me tell you a little about Colleen, some things that you may not know. Colleen grew up in a small town of Verona, Pennsylvania. Population was approximately 2,500, very small town. She has two brothers, Vic and Rode, who were both older, and always thought they knew better than she did. Her dad was a self-taught electrical engineer for a small steel mill there in town. Her family didn't have much. If the philosophy was in that family, and what they had learned to do, if you don't have it, you do without, or you learn to make it. the small house which was located in their backyard. And Colleen has loved spending time with her grandmother. When Colleen was 4, her father was 39 years old, and he suffered his first heart event, and I think it was a heart attack. And in those days, there was not much that could be done. By age 46, his heart gave out, and he passed away. It's not easy to lose your father when you're 10 years old. Colleen loved her father. This is one of the many hardships that Colleen would suffer in her life. Colleen loved cats. She had one cat, and I think this cat's name was Tiny. And she would tell me that when she would go walking, Tiny would walk with her. Now, anytime you hear about somebody having a trained cat, it just is an oxymoron. It doesn't make sense. So I don't know whether that was a special cat or whether it was Colleen. Colleen wanted to become a vet. But in those days, women were not welcome to become vets, and it was difficult. And so she had put that aside. At 16 years old, she attended a Youth for Christ conference in Ocean City, Maryland. And even though her family had gone to church, she never understood what it meant to know Christ as her personal Savior. But it was there that she learned about that. And it was there that she committed her life to Christ. She was so excited when she came back and she wanted to tell some people, but they were not interested. Some years later, as she was a student at Northern Illinois University in her early 20s, she had had some very difficult things go on in her life. And she needed some help. She heard some singing through the wall in the apartment next to her. And so she went over and knocked on the door. She knew what it was. There were Christian songs they were singing. Just so happened they were Crew staff members. And it changed her life. While Colleen majored in early childhood education, it was the changed lives of students that she started to work with and saw students come to Christ. And that's why she made the decision to join Crew staff when she graduated at 25 years old. She thought that was the most strategic way she could invest her love for eternity. Her first assignment was Penn State. Now you can see where the connection is. And that's where we met. At a spring retreat in 1971, when I saw her at this retreat, I didn't know her. I saw her, she was new, and I said, I'd like to get to know her. She saw me and said, oh no, another name to remember. The women students, as we heard about a couple of them, the Colleen disciple loved her. And she had an impact on some of their lives. I think what they liked about her is that Colleen was not about Colleen. She was about you. She listened to them. She had incredible wisdom. She was known for her wisdom. She was so wise and practical. And they just liked hanging out with her. The staff at Penn State were divided up among the 4 major dorm areas. And in my particular dorm area, West Halls, they paired up a man and a woman, and there was no man staff member. So Colleen got paired up with me. I think at that time I was the student president for Crew. And so we worked together, and that's where our friendship began. I can still remember the times that we would sit up late hours into the night, which I can't do anymore. And we would just talk. It's amazing when you're dating and in love, all the things you can talk about. We go into late hours of the night. It was fun. In 1972, one other thing. When I was 20 and a half is when I first met Colleen at that retreat. And there has to be a transition for a boy, sometime as they're growing up, to start seeing themselves as a man. And I saw myself as a boy when I was a student at Penn State, but it was because of Colleen that I began to see myself differently. And it's when I began to mature as a result of her. 1972, Crew had a big conference I was working on called Expo 72. The goal was to have 100,000 students in Dallas, Texas. Only 80,000 showed up. It was a success. And Colleen had a particular assignment at Penn State, working on that. The staff were involved in sending a mailing out, or I'm not sure how many mailings they sent out, all over the state, inviting people and recruiting people to come to the conference. She got to work with a guy that some of you know, Sherm Brand. He was a brand new staff member. And their relationship working on this little project showed some of Colleen's values and the differences between her values and Sherman's. Colleen thought that the envelope that was going out should look good. The stamp should be in its right place. The mailing label, that company's mailing label should be in its right place. But Sherman could care less about that. And so they had some tension. Colleen thought that things should be done right and with excellence. The summer I joined staff, we drove the staff training together. Our dating didn't go well while we were at Purdue University using their facilities. To this day, I still don't know what happened. I don't know why things were going south. But in the fall, it turned around. We got past it. Still not sure what we got past. I'll have to wait until I get to heaven, but then it won't matter. And we were engaged at my parents' house that Thanksgiving. It was difficult for my parents. They weren't excited about me marrying somebody who was not Jewish. And I understand, but they soon learned to love Colleen. You see, she treated them with honor and respect, and they responded to that. When Colleen would talk with my mother, she listened, and that meant something to my mother. That caught her attention. Colleen, as you probably picked up, she was private, independent, resourceful, steadfast, unflappable. When we encountered a crisis, or what I perceived as a crisis, I would get a little hyper. All right, some of you know me this morning. But not Colleen. Colleen did not speculate what we could not know, but act quietly and strategically on what we did know to solve the problem. She had a calming effect on me. Now I am in trouble without her. She was a safe person. People could confide in her. To be Colleen's friend, you had to earn her trust, and you had to be a safe person. She was someone that people would come to for advice. As I said, she had incredible wisdom and insight. And she saw things all the time that I didn't see. Isn't that the definition of marriage also? I mean? She was resourceful. When we were young and couldn't afford